Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining Gryphon AI's Collections Contact Governance Masterclass, Navigating Compliance for First-Party Collectors and Creditors in a Rapidly Evolving Regulatory Environment. I'm Stephen Dunnigan, Vice President of Customer Experience here at Gryphon AI, and I'm joined by Patricia Sterling, our Product Owner for Compliance, including Collections.
Hi, Stephen.
Hey, Patricia. By way of agenda for the masterclass, we're going to give you a little overview of who Gryphon AI is and our Gryphon One platform, the regulatory landscape for collections specifically, with a focus on first-party creditors. What are your contact compliance options for complying with the vast rules that exist on a state, federal, and jurisdictional level for collections? Gryphon One for collections. What do we have in terms of a solution that's available out in the marketplace? We'll talk a little bit about a client success story, one of many that we have here at Gryphon AI, and then why Gryphon AI and why now, right? What we do in terms of our governance, risk, and compliance framework, how the contact governance imperative fits into that, and obviously some next steps, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have. So who's Gryphon AI, right? We are the gold standard in automated contact governance. We've been around for over 20 years, and we were born out of the do not contact rules that surfaced in the late 90s and the 2000s and beyond. We deal almost exclusively with enterprise clients, big, complicated organizations that fall into categories such as, or industries such as healthcare, banking, insurance, telecommunications, and others, all with a lot of scrutiny on their business, especially as it comes to outreach, whether that outreach is for marketing, sales, servicing, or collections. And we always had a very unique approach in terms of contact compliance. It's real time, meaning we enforce it at the point of marketing interaction or collections interaction or servicing. And make sure that any interactions meet the muster of the law or your business specific rules, and if not, we thwart those contacts from actually happening. So it's a software as a service based platform with a focus on contact governance. We look at ourselves as a leader in that space. Everything runs through the Gryphon One platform. Everything we do, every problem we solve, every solution we bring to the table is solved through the Gryphon One platform. With great governance, risk, and compliance alignment and architecture. We're a Boston-based company with fast approaching 100 people. Patricia, would you mind giving us a little overview of the collections regulatory landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've done, broken it out into really two areas. One is the federal landscape, which applies mostly to third-party collectors. The TCPA, of course, applies to everybody. You got to make sure you have consent for those calls. FDCPA and CFPB, primarily third-party, where it gets interesting and more focused on first-party, obviously, is the state and local controls. On the right-hand side, just an overview of the different localities where we're tracking individual legislation and existing regulations, California, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, et cetera. We'll get into a little bit of detail in some future slides about changes in those areas. But where we see more regulation in the first party collector area is really in this state and local controls. So here's the landscape for those state and local regulations, as I said. So we have the New York City Shield Act. New York City has had a regulation on the books for a while. They've updated it starting in September of this year. They're actually increasing the frequency limit from 2 calls per 7 days to 3 calls per 7 days. We have the fairly recent Rosenthal rule in California, applying basically the same federal regulations that we see in FDCPA to first party collectors in California. Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Oregon, Washington State, and Washington, D.C. all have frequency caps that apply to first party as well as third party. And some of those states have specific caps that apply to contacting people at their place of employment, which is a really important place area to consider when you're contacting your debtors. I'm going to circle back to anti-harassment, wrong number database. We always want to make sure that the reassigned numbers database. We always want to make sure that you're contacting the person that you intend to contact, making sure that the who, as well as you're covering the who, as well as the when and how often. And then there's the multi-jurisdictional complexity. You may be calling somebody who has a phone number that belongs to one state, but they live in another state, and maybe some federal rules apply to what you're calling. And you need to make sure that you're applying all of those rules properly. And then swinging back to anti-harassment, there are many places that don't have specific collections, frequency, curfew, contact compliance rules around collections, but they do have UDAP protections. So you need to make sure that you have controls around those localities as well to make sure that you aren't encouraging harassment behaviors towards those customers.
And Patricia, it's safe to say that abusive collections practices it can be a little bit ambiguous. These are up for the companies to make those determinations.
Yes, absolutely. And you need the flexibility to be able to target different rules for different locations based on the regulatory landscape, the class action lawsuits that you're seeing in those areas, to be able to target the precise rules that you need there.
Thank you.
So do you need a collections compliance solution? A lot of people think they have controls that they need in place already. So some questions to consider. Are you performing first-party consumer debt collections outreach? Do you contact with third parties? Are you concerned about the constantly evolving regulatory landscape? Are you able to keep up with those changes? Do you have an audit trail of why you were able to make any given call? Can you prove that each call is legal? Do you have a legal team to be monitoring all of the changes? All those questions to consider. If you answered yes to any of them, you are liable for violations, even when you're outsourcing. And you should be considering having a solution that helps you track all those changes.
Yeah, Patricia, I mean, you mentioned audit trail and defensibility. Yeah. One thing I think we know from doing this over 25 years is that, regulators, class action attorneys, litigators, they're not interested in trust us, we have this handled. You need to be able to show them explicit proof that you are complying, you have the controls in place, etc.
Exactly. You need to be able to show at any given point in time what the controls are that are in place and prove that they were followed.
Okay, thank you.
The one question that we see people come up against all the time is, should they build it or should they buy it? And this overlaps a lot with what we talked about last time. If you're going to build in-house, you need to make sure that you have the resources needed to monitor all legal and regulatory changes happening across the United States or in any region that you're calling into. You need to build a thorough testing plan in order to make sure that those rules are being applied properly. You need a dedicated engineering QA staff, and you need to maintain the budget to keep those as you're going to be implementing changes continuously. You need to make sure that you're building the same in-house audit trails that we talked about previously, so that you can prove that you're following those controls and applying them properly. In every regulatory change, you need to make sure you have the budget to apply those engineering and QA resources. And if you buy from a trusted partner, all of that's built in. Your partner will have the legal resources. They have the engineering and QA. They have the expertise. The audit trail comes with that purchase for that partner. So all items to consider as you come up against that decision.
Yeah, Patricia, these are great points. I mean, I believe folks underestimate what the effort is, what the cost is, what the long-term support is. I mean, obviously there's tracking the rules, interpreting what's applicable to us versus not. but then you have to incorporate those rule sets into your solution, into your platform, right?
Yep.
If you build it yourselves, and on top of it all, you need to scale whatever you have. So as needs change, as traffic or volume goes up, as rules change, you need to make sure the platform accounts for that. And
Yes.
that's where I think folks lose a little bit of focus. One thing I will say around collections is, it's not like sales and marketing. There's not a ton of, do not contact lists, right? Whether they're national list or state list or wireless data, it is more time bound, meaning you need to enforce that at the point of
Yes.
interaction across channels, phone, text, etc. And folks lose sight of that, right? And you could build your list, scrub things
Absolutely. Yeah.
queue. Yeah.
When you're doing sort of the more traditional list-based, telemarketing compliance, you can get away with scrubbing, pre-scrub overnight, make sure that you're checking all the lists you're supposed to check your exemptions. But like you said, that doesn't pass muster for collections compliance, because it does really need to be point of contact. You need to know what else happened that day before you're initiating this specific outreach and be able to track that live.
Yeah, we've seen it over and over again. Budgets have been projected and they've been blown out of the water by what actuality really means, without really consideration for what do we do forward as we need to update things, change rules, comply with whatever the regulatory landscape dictates. That's great food for thought.
So what does Gryphon 1 for collections provide in terms of collections compliance? We provide TCPA, FDCPA, and CFPB enforcement. As we mentioned previously, that is primarily third party, but we do see customers using the same types of frameworks outlined in FDCPA specifically, to make sure they're adhering to UDAP, anti-harassment policies. TCPA obviously applies to everybody. We come out of the box with all state and local frequency controls. We constantly monitor the regulatory landscape. We're updating rules as they apply, as they go into effect. We have a litigator list. So it's a list of known litigators, and we can make sure that those phone numbers, those contacts get scrubbed from your list so that you aren't contacting them. The reassigned numbers database, as I mentioned earlier, you got to make sure that you're contacting the right person, and we can help you do that, scrubbing your numbers up against the reassigned numbers database, making sure that the numbers are still assigned to the people that you're trying to contact. We have a custom business rules engine. So we have a multitude of layers of business rules in our platform, as you know, Stefan, but we also know that our customers like to do things their way. And if there's customization that they need that isn't existing in our pre-built set of rules, we can work with you to customize them. And finally, we have a business-to-business number database. And what that allows is you to be able to track when you're contacting people's place of employment, or other business number related regulations.
Yeah, a lot of considerations, Patricia.
Mm-hmm. So what are our frequency, curfew, and advanced controls? We've mentioned over and over again the jurisdictional level, federal, state frequency. We have account level settings, making sure that we're bundling either at the loan or account level all of the signers. So your primary co-signers, making sure that you can apply contact frequency controls consistently across an account. Our curfew blocking and frequency blocking actually come with zip code logic. So you can provide either the phone number or the zip code in order to determine location. And we can use whichever you choose to determine the rules that will be applied. In the case of curfew, our standard out of the box configuration actually takes the most restrictive curfew setting based on the overlap. So you're calling somebody with a phone number in Hawaii, but a zip code in Massachusetts, you're going to get a much narrower curfew just to make sure that you're really not contacting them out of hours. Declare disaster blocking. So we have a lot of customers who do not want to contact their customers during a state of emergency, whether it's local or FEMA. So we can manage those location-specific block areas for you. And we can also enforce a call delay between attempts. So you may want to be able to call people a few times a day, but you don't want to do it, right on the back. So we can enforce a half hour or hour or 2 hour delay between those calls. So our other differentiation, we mentioned the litigator list and the reassigned numbers database. We mentioned zip code. Let's circle back to the account linking and co-applicant logic. So with our account level logic, you are able to specify the frequency controls either at the account level or the loan level or the phone number to really get as granular as possible. Client managed frequency adjustments, we are out of the box. They are configurable without even getting into custom business logic. If you have custom rules that you want to apply to Iowa or Texas, that's fully configurable in our system. We have a full audit trail for every single certification request, every request to update right party contact or promise to pay logic. Every frequency attempt is all logged in our system and can be provided through our audit trail system. We are multi-channel, so we help you be compliant across not just phone outreach, but also text and email. And all of the data that you send to us and that we process for you, all of your certification data is available in our real-time dashboards in our Insights platform.
Patricia, circling back to client managed frequency adjustments. So in essence, if you certify a record, it's identified as contactable, but the call never goes out or it's blocked by some sort of network error. Yep. Out in the public switch telephone network, you can actually decrease the frequency counts to ensure that things like dispositions are accounted for.
Yes, so you can say this call didn't count. I don't want to increase the frequency. Send a request back to us, and we'll suppress that most recent frequency attempt.
Yep. So I mean,
we also have customers using it in the other direction to increase frequency. They have an override process that allows, for example, a manual dial to go around a block that we had instituted, and then they need to say, okay, actually, we did contact that number, so we can increase the frequency and apply it on future certifications.
Excellent, thank you. So just talking a little bit more around the integrations and the self-service nature of the Gryphon One platform. One thing we've known for a very long time is that we need to be where our customers and prospects and customers are. That is embedded in their core systems, whether it is a CCaaS platform, UCaaS platform, CRM platform, Marcom, telephony switching infrastructure, meaning your prototypical telephone carriers, SIP networks, etc. We need to be where our customers are, and again, prospects. But the other thing we truly understand doing this a long time is you cannot create friction within the agent experience. If you do, you've already lost the battle. So everything we do is built with a frictionless agent experience. It's embedded in your systems of record. So from a capabilities perspective, everything that we do from a visualization perspective runs through what we call Gryphon One Home. That's your contact governance visibility layer. As Patricia mentioned, we have risk and reach dashboards, comprehensive self-service dashboards. Risk is the mitigation component. What did I avoid from a potential fine and penalty perspective? Making sure I stay out of the crosshairs of the regulators. But from a reach perspective, I don't care if it's marketing, sales, servicing, collections. If you look at the letter of the law, you can market, collect, or service yourself right out of business. You need to consider things like hygiene, number recovery, lead recovery, any way to intelligently bring back the marketplace, inclusive of intelligently managing consent records in sales and marketing, established business relationships. So there are those capabilities. Compliance Hub is part of our, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. It is a visualization layer, but it's sort of the totality of all of your controls, everything from your procedures and policies to your documentation to your ability to search a record or audit a record one by one or in bulk to determine what happened, what transactions took place against this record. So if a regulator comes knocking or a class action attorney, everything is completely at your fingertips. And you mentioned the configurable insights dashboards. So dashboards around anything that happens within the Gryphon One infrastructure. We were born out of telephony, but we've extended that to an open API framework. So we have a vast library of API calls to our platform. We are multi-channel, so it's not just phone or text or email. It's a combination thereof. And as mentioned, they're agent-facing dashboards for sort of self-reporting purposes, and then there are executive dashboards. And I mentioned core systems. Here's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of the companies we work with, from Pega to Salesforce to NICE, Cisco, Genesys, AWS. You see a lot more deployments using AWS Connect specifically. So any core system where you're doing any sort of interaction for collections purposes, down to individual folks on their cell phones, we can support those applications. So think kiosk to the call center, everything in between. So from a visualization perspective, right, what is sort of our collections work and call flow? Obviously, there's a lot going on. You listen to Patricia talk through the rules and regulations and the various things we consider, which is really just the tip of the iceberg. But everything comes through that center piece, which is your customer data, meaning your proprietary data of opt-ins, opt-outs, any business-specific rules or internal rules you have, the Gryphon AI decisioning tree, everything comes through that database, comes to endpoints on our side, whether those endpoints are secure file transfer, web service, SIP or session border controllers, all the compliance applications, the governance, auditing, and repositories are all there, all with an eye towards visibility to what is happening. So it's visibility. If someone was to come and say, I violated the law, we had to do an audit of some sorts, do I have everything I need at my fingertips? Because trust me that I have it handled is not an adequate answer. It just doesn't work when you're dealing with regulators. You need to prove it. And then part of that proving it is making sure that your people are trained. So we have a comprehensive, what we call Gryphon University training modules across various, marketing compliance, collections, AI, and other aspects of what you need to train your folks on, both at the workforce level as well as at the supervisory level. And then if you look at the periphery, you see all the various things that are taking into account in terms of proprietary data, any sort of campaign or do not contact screening profile structure. You mentioned, Patricia, a right party contact and promise to pay and frequency, R&D litigator list, ported and wireless number blocks. It's all aggregated by us, and it's all comes through the Gryphon One platform. And then in the lower left, you have your UCAS platforms and CCAS and SMS systems and all of the ways that you would do outreach, whether it be in the field or in your contact centers. And those are all subjected to the rules and regulations, the controls that you have in place, your proprietary data sets, and everything you would need to stay compliant for one, but defend yourself if something was to happen. I want to talk real briefly about one of our customer stories. I mean, we have a multitude of them, especially on the collection side. But we had a consumer debt collections company come to us not too long ago. They were a premise-based Genesys client that was moving to the cloud. that is replatforming. That's not moving from one CCaaS platform to another. That's not the only replatforming use case. When you move from a prem to a cloud service, you're basically replatforming your entirety of your platform, and you have to decide whether I want to take my precious resources and allocate them to building out contact compliance strategy, or do I want to focus on all the other components of replatforming? And the challenges were just that, resources, but it was also, was I complying to all the state-specific rules that exist and jurisdictional specific rules that exist that are separate from what's happening federally? So we did a coordination between a variety of different vendors and us, and we actually stood up a platform. And in the first six months for this particular customer, we saw 38.5 million transactions come through the system, of which almost 28 million were allowed. But you look at that number that was blocked, 10.6 million records blocked. Many of them were for things like frequency and curfew, so those time-bound restrictions that we mentioned earlier, but also Patricia mentioned at some length, when you call someone at their place of business, there are rules associated with that. You can't bypass them on their landline at home or their wireless number and call them at their place of business without guardrails in place, and we act as that layer. So the certifications are 350,000 plus a day, which is pretty substantial, all things considered. And then just from a technical highlight perspective, hybrid rule set. We mentioned, there are regulations out there that you need to comply with, but they're hybrid. There are rules that are business specific that you need to take into account. Using zip code and area code to determine where someone is. I mean, we live in a mobile society. Folks is, in Patricia's use case, living in Hawaii with Massachusetts numbers or vice versa. I mean, that's the way it works, and you need to account for that. Professional litigators, these are serial plaintiffs that are pulled out of state and federal court filings to ensure that you're not reaching out to these folks and getting entrapped to some sort of fine or penalty or negotiation outside of court. But I mentioned do not contact breakdown, but frequency, calling hours, those time-bound restrictions is where the main focus was, and where we see the vast majority, I should say, of the blocks. On-the-fly rule adjustments, things change, new systems go on board, agentic AI is introduced. You need to make sure that the rules can adjust accordingly. Custom rules in specific states around frequency. These things do change on the fly to meet business objectives, and Gryphon AI is your partner in those adjustments. And then you want to ensure everything that we do. Me talking as a VP of customer experience is about customer satisfaction, making sure there's always proof of value. There's a trusted advisorship that's always being created in a partnership, with some system like the Gryphon AI and the Gryphon One platform. Your CSAT scores will be through the roof, because you're complying with the needs and the wants of the folks that you're reaching out to. So it's all about ensuring that customer experience for so many different reasons. I mentioned earlier Gryphon AI and our thought around governance, risk, and compliance, and where we fit into that. Well, one thing I can tell you is we're not a GRC platform. We understand we have a corner of the room, and that is contact governance. So when we think of governance, risk, and compliance, we think governance is your policies and procedures layer, meaning I've centralized everything that we do from an outreach, contact compliance perspective into one central repository, so that I have it at my fingertips if I need it. Then from a risk perspective, you've heard it mentioned several times here, and we focused on it because we know the importance, is your defensibility layer. That's your audit trail. What happens if a regulator comes knocking? Do you have everything at your fingertips to prove your innocence? And that's not only the certifications themselves and what's happened on these various outreaches across channels, it's the data management element, your proprietary data like consent and exemptions and opt-outs. Are they taken into account what is the transactional history there? And as you move to the far right, compliance, that's who we've always been, right? We cut our teeth in the late 90s, as stated. It's always been around enforcing contact governance, contact compliance at that point of interaction, using real-time methodologies to do so, whether that be an open API framework or it be a telephony infrastructure. Nonetheless, at that point of interaction, we need to make sure that those impermissible contacts are not made. And then why Gryphon AI? Why now? Well, we've established the market reality, right? Risk is increasing and diversifying across channels. Regulation is not slowing, it's accelerating. And one of the things that we've noticed, and it's not only across collections, it's across other telemarketing rules and regulations, for instance, is the federal government, as stated they would, is slowed down some on the introduction of new rules, right? It's more the federalization of everything that's going on. But at the end of the day, the states are filling the gaps, meaning the states are a lot more active. The federal government's very active in enforcement, but the states are active from a legislative perspective. So, customer expectations are rising, right? Compliant contact damages and damages the trust and brand that you have with your customers or your debtors, right? Contact compliance solution alone is no longer sufficient. You need procedures, you need policies, you need audit trail, all the things we established while discussing GRC. First-party debt collectors are facing a lot of the same scrutiny as third-party, and organizations have to make the decision on how far you're taking these rules and regulations that may be third-party specific, but applying it to what you're doing as a first-party collector. And then I mentioned the regulatory landscape and how it's shifting. New York City Shield Act, California Rosenthal Act, a lot of emerging stuff that's happening on a state level. So from a Gryphon One Advantage perspective, utilizing the Gryphon One platform, it's confidence at scale, right? We're battle tested, enterprise scale, and volume, right? We've been doing this a long time, processing somewhere in the range of about 25 billion transactions a year. That's a lot of volume, doing it for big organizations, household, global brands. It's all about contact compliance without friction. It's got to be embedded in your core systems and systems of record and invisible to agents. You can't have friction introduced, or that's counterproductive. And then, engagement that drives growth and ROI. So I mentioned risk mitigation versus, expansion of reach. Well, you need to consider both, right? You need to stay out of the crosshairs, from a regulatory perspective, but you can't do so much that it damages your business. So we're all about returning trust to marketing, sales, servicing, and collections. We evolve with the regulations. We don't react to them, right? We have an in-house legal team, in-house regulatory team, third-party outside counsel that we deal with to make sure that when something's introduced, we're watching it from cradle to grave, meaning introduction at a state legislature level, all the way through navigating that legislature and getting passed into law and then being applied or becoming effective. We're monitoring that. We're adjusting our platform accordingly. And as stated, we're deep in terms of governance, risk, and compliance intelligence. It's foundational to what we're doing from a Gryphon One platform perspective. What first and foremost, myself and Patricia would love to thank you for your attention to this content. We'd love to continue the dialogue. We'd love to schedule a call, have a proof of value or live demo discussion, get anything from a technical or interoperability perspective, do a review, and then talk to you about what a solution like Gryphon One actually costs. And you'd be surprised. It's not as expensive as you may think, based on everything we've discussed here and everything we do from a risk and a reach perspective. So let's build your collections contact governance program together. I'm very appreciative that you joined today's masterclass, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. And obviously, we're open to any questions that you may have.